What if I told you the courtroom that was meant to deliver justice ended up delivering silence? That the man who prided himself on exposing corruption was about to be exposed himself? Judge Edward Chen had seen every trick in the book, or so he thought. But on that cold Monday morning, when Representative Jasmine Crockett stood before him, holding a single sheet of paper, everything changed. It wasn't her tone. It wasn't her defiance. It was what she knew. In that moment, every camera, every whisper, and every ounce of power in that room shifted. Because sometimes truth doesn't shout. It simply stands there and waits to be heard. Washington, D.C., 2029. The air outside the federal courthouse was thick with rain and tension. News vans lined the streets. Anchors rehearsing lines about accountability, ethics, and the trial that could shake the Capitol. Judge Edward Chen had built a reputation as a man of order, calm, sharp, and untouchable. But every man has a weakness, and his was pride. To him, this case was more than just a legal battle. It was a message that no politician was above the law. Across the courtroom, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her blazer, eyes steady. Her every movement deliberate. She wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to challenge the system that had already judged her guilty. And Chen was about to learn that justice has more than one author. Judge Edward Chen had spent decades climbing through the legal hierarchy, from district prosecutor to federal judge, the kind of man who quoted the Constitution like scripture. His rulings were crisp, his tone cold, his image immaculate. To the public, he was a symbol of order in a city drowning in chaos. But behind that polished image, whispers followed him, of private dinners, undisclosed donors, and rulings that always seemed to favor the same interests. Jasmine Crockett knew those whispers weren't rumors. For months, she had been gathering fragments, bank transfers, leaked memos, and late-night emails connecting Chen's courtroom to a network of powerful lobbyists. Each piece on its own was meaningless. Together they painted a portrait of influence hiding in plain sight. Yet here she was, standing before him accused of misuse of office. The irony wasn't lost on her. As Chen leaned forward, glasses resting on his nose, his voice carried that familiar authority. "Representative Crockett," he began, "this court will not be a stage for political theater." She smiled slightly, not out of arrogance, but out of certainty. Because in her briefcase lay a single citation, one that could unravel the very foundation of his moral high ground. The courtroom buzzed faintly. Reporters scribbling, aides whispering. To everyone watching, it looked like another case of a politician cornered by justice. But Jasmine wasn't cornered. She was waiting for the right moment to strike. And when she did, it wouldn't be with anger or emotion. It would be with the quiet, devastating precision of truth. For the first time in years, Judge Chen felt something unfamiliar. Not power, not control, but fear. The kind that creeps in when a man realizes he's about to lose the narrative he spent his life protecting. 3 nights before the hearing, Jasmine had sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through half-drawn blinds. Her team had warned her not to go further. "You're going after a federal judge," they said. People disappear for less, but she wasn't chasing glory. She was chasing proof. For months, she'd traced Chen's connections through a maze of shell companies and campaign donations that always led to the same silent benefactor, a consulting firm with no employees, no offices, and a single client, the Justice Initiative Fund. At first glance, the fund looked legitimate: scholarships, legal research, advocacy grants. But buried deep within the paperwork, Jasmine found something that froze her in place: Edward Chen's signature. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times, authorizing transfers to private accounts linked to judicial appointments. He wasn't just bending the law, he was shaping it. As she stared at the documents, she remembered the last conversation she had with her mentor, a journalist who'd warned her about power. "They don't fear exposure," he said. "They fear memory. Because once the public forgets, they win again." That thought followed her into the courtroom. Every question Chen asked, every ruling he made, felt rehearsed. An effort to keep control of a story that was already slipping through his hands. Behind his confident expression, he was scanning for weakness. He didn't see courage in Jasmine's eyes. He saw inevitability. And then came the moment that shifted everything. During cross-examination, Jasmine pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your Honor," she said, her voice even, "before I proceed, I'd like this entered into evidence." The courtroom went still. Chen hesitated, sensing something dangerous. "What is this?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed the citation on the clerk's desk, a federal code so obscure that even seasoned lawyers rarely referenced it, but Judge Chen knew it immediately. It was a procedural law regarding judicial conflicts of interest, a clause he'd quietly fought to amend years ago. The silence in the room felt heavier than the rain outside. Reporters leaned forward. Attorneys exchanged looks, and for the first time, the judge who'd ruled over hundreds of cases with unshakable authority found himself under the microscope. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her evidence spoke louder than accusation. In that moment, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about truth finally pushing through the cracks of a system built to bury. The envelope changed everything. What began as a routine ethics hearing had now turned into a slow, silent unraveling of a man's legacy. Overnight, the media spun theories. Some said Jasmine was grandstanding. Others whispered she had found something explosive, something even the Justice Department didn't want out, but none of them knew how deep it went. Inside that single citation, Jasmine had buried a key, not a literal one, but a legal one, a document tracing the creation of the Justice Initiative Fund back to a private account in Singapore. That account belonged not to Judge Chen, but to a network of corporate attorneys who had been funding judicial campaigns for over a decade. Chen wasn't the architect. He was the face, a pawn wearing a robe. When Jasmine realized that, the anger she'd carried for months turned into something else, pity, because beneath his arrogance, Edward Chen was just another man who thought he could navigate power without being consumed by it. As the next day's session began, Chen's composure was cracked. He spoke less, blinked more. His gavel struck harder than necessary, but behind his irritation was panic. He had received an anonymous message the night before. "She's not after you. She's after them," for the first time. He understood the scale of what Jasmine had found. The Justice Initiative wasn't just a slush fund. It was a control system. Judges, prosecutors, even members of Congress, all quietly linked through legal donations, funneled through non-profits that promised reform while buying silence. And now, that web was collapsing in front of live cameras. During a recess, Chen approached Jasmine in the corridor. No press, no jury, just two people standing on opposite sides of the same truth. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. His voice was low, almost pleading. Jasmine looked at him, not with defiance, but with quiet empathy. "I understand perfectly," she replied. "You thought you were serving justice, but justice doesn't serve anyone." He paused, searching for words. "They'll come for you next." "I know," she said, "but at least I'll see them coming." That was the moment Edward Chen finally saw her not as a defendant, but as a mirror, reflecting every compromise he'd made in the name of ambition. For years, he'd convinced himself that bending the rules was necessary to preserve stability. Now he realized he hadn't preserved anything. He'd only postponed the inevitable. By the end of the day, new evidence began leaking online. Encrypted files, sealed court documents, offshore transaction logs. None of it came directly from Jasmine. Someone inside the system had joined her cause. The power that once protected Judge Chen was turning inward, eating its own. And for the first time in his career, the man who judged others had no control over the verdict that was coming for him. The hearing's final day drew a crowd larger than any courtroom had seen in years. The air was electric, heavy with the kind of anticipation that comes before a storm. Camera lights glared. Reporters whispered. Every seat was filled. Even those who didn't know the law could feel it. Something historic was about to happen. Judge Edward Chen walked in late. His robe hung unevenly, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. He looked less like a judge and more like a man walking into his own trial, and in many ways, he was. Jasmine Crockett stood ready, a stack of papers beside her, but she didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on Chen, not out of hatred, but recognition. This was no longer a battle between accuser and accused. It was truth standing across from guilt. Waiting for acknowledgement, Chen cleared his throat. "Representative Crockett," he began, "this court—" But before he could finish, she interrupted softly. "Your Honor, with respect, this court cannot proceed without full disclosure. And you know why." The room went silent. She slid a flash drive across the table, the files that had leaked days before. Transaction records, sealed communications, judicial directives marked confidential. It wasn't just his name on them. It was half the political circle surrounding him. Chen's hand trembled slightly as he picked it up. He could have ordered the evidence stricken. He could have shut the hearing down, but instead he stared at the screen, scanning his own history, his own signature, staring back at him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly he removed his glasses and set them aside. "Let the record show," he said slowly, "that the court acknowledges this submission." Gasps rippled through the room. The man who built his reputation on control had just surrendered it. Live on record. Reporters rushed for their phones. Some in the audience began to applaud before being silenced by bailiffs. Jasmine didn't move. She simply watched as Chen continued, his voice unsteady but honest. "For years, I believed that bending the system would protect it. But power doesn't protect, and it corrupts, and Truth does not belong to judges or politicians. It belongs to the people who demand it." It wasn't a confession. It was something deeper, a reckoning. By the time he finished, the cameras were rolling non-stop. No gavel, no verdict. Just silence. The kind that follows when something too big to process has just happened. Jasmine exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, she felt light, not because she'd won, but because she'd finally been heard. Judge Edward Chen looked at her one last time and said, "They told me to expose you, Jasmine. But in the end, you exposed me. And maybe that's justice." In that moment, neither of them were villains or heroes, just two people standing in the debris of a truth that refused to stay buried. By dawn, the city was awake, and not with celebration, but confusion. The headlines read like fragments of a national conscience. "Judge Chen admits misconduct. Representative Crockett's evidence shakes federal bench. The system cracks." Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, but puddles still reflected the flashing red and blue lights. Jasmine stepped out quietly, her phone buzzing non-stop. Reporters, allies, threats, all blending into one long hum of noise. She turned it off. For the first time in years, silence felt like peace. Inside, Judge Chen remained seated long after the cameras had gone. The courtroom was empty now, his gavel lying on its side, the symbol of a power that no longer felt righteous. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered to himself, "Maybe justice isn't something we hold. Maybe it's something we serve." The following days moved like smoke. Hearings postponed, resignations filed, investigations launched. But neither Jasmine nor Chen appeared in public again. Rumor said she left Washington. Others claimed she stayed, working quietly behind the scenes to rebuild what had been broken. What mattered most wasn't what happened to them, but what they left behind, a nation forced to look at itself, a conversation that refused to fade. By the time the sun rose over the Capitol, one thing was clear. The story wasn't about corruption or revenge anymore. It was about conscience, and the cost of telling the truth in a world built on lies. Power doesn't disappear. It just changes hands. Today, it wears new suits, signs new laws, and smiles for new cameras. But underneath, it's the same hunger, the same fear of truth. Judge Edward Chen's downfall wasn't just about corruption. It was about what happens when good people convince themselves that silence is safer than honesty. And Jasmine Crockett's victory wasn't about exposure or fame. It was about courage, the quiet kind that doesn't make headlines, but changes them. In the end, justice didn't arrive with applause or handcuffs. It arrived in a single moment of truth, when a man who thought he controlled everything finally chose to listen. The story of Judge Chen and Jasmine Crockett isn't about guilt or redemption. It's about the thin line between them, and how easily we all could cross it. Because in politics, in courts, and in life, the loudest truth is always the one they try hardest to silence. What do you think? Was Judge Edward Chen a villain, or just another victim of the system he helped create? Comment your thoughts below. I read every one of them, and don't forget to subscribe. Because the next name I reveal might not just be a story, it might be real,